Welcome to this week's episode of Fellowship in Essential Oils. This week, we're looking at an oil gifted to us from New Zealand. We're looking at Manuka, Liz.
Yes, and it's an oil that I have used for 30 years, but I still don't know how to say. Is it Manuka or is it Manuka, I wonder?
Well, I know there's a macron above the first A, which does kind of suggest that we need to say that A a little bit longer. But I've actually asked a lot of people from New Zealand, and some say Manuka, and a couple say Manuka. I don't quite know, so I'm going to go with
All right,
Manuka.
I'm going to go with Manuka because I like Manuka and Kanuka together.
Yes, sounds beautiful. Now, most people have heard of Manuka, probably from Manuka honey, but obviously we're going to be talking more about the essential oil, which is steam distilled from the flowering tops and mainly the leaves of the plant.
Yeah, exactly. And as you say, like the honey itself is so well sought after. Here in this country, if you want a good pot of Manuka honey, you're looking at 100 quid, which is ridiculous amounts of money. But there's so much research now of the benefits of a honey that comes from a single flora. So, for example, I use orange blossom honey because that's much cheaper. But this idea of them have the concentration of the properties of the plant through the pollen into the honey is really well sought after, but and very well researched too. There's a huge amount of research done into Manuka honey, but not that much done onto Manuka essential oil, sadly. And what's interesting was when I was first training, I can remember the excitement when a clinical trial came out. I can feel myself getting ready to sneeze, I will warn you. And in a petri dish, they had been able to prove that Manuka could kill MRSA, the superbug that goes all the way through hospitals. And actually, more recent clinical trials show that it will kill it within 5 seconds, 100% in 5 seconds. So this was like very, very exciting. It was on proper national news. But since that time, they've been able to, they haven't been able to find a way to be able to replicate it on a big enough scale in human cells and across like a general population. So, because, I mean, I don't know if people understand that when something happens in a petri dish, it's not obviously affected by other pathogens within the blood. So quite often essential oils, when they are added to blood, will kind of bubble up and go now and won't act the same way. So I'm guessing that they will now research it under a different way of doing things called nano encapsulation, which is a biological way where they can encapsulate actual constituents and protect them against other things, so that concentrated property can still go ahead. And it's very new technology, but lots of essential oils are being investigated for with nano encapsulation to be able to see how they perform when isolated from blood pathogens.
Now, obviously, it probably has a lot of potential in the future, but I still think that there's lots of different uses that we can use it at home for these days. Sometimes it's nicknamed super tea tree. Would you agree with that statement or not?
Well, yeah, I mean, the Maori, of course, have used it as an indigenous medicine for a long, long time. And there is some suggestion by some authorities that it actually might be the original tea tree, and chemically, actually, they're quite dissimilar, I think. I don't think there's huge amounts of cineol, for example, in Manuka, but it definitely, to me, that's my super three: tea tree, Manuka, Kanuka, for any kind of respiratory problems, any kind of coughs or colds. So I've just developed, I don't know if you can even see, it's very sore, like a wicklow down there, and I've never had one before, and I was kept looking and thinking, what's there? I can't see anything, but it's very, very sore. So it's obviously some kind of infection. So I shall put Manuka, Kanuka and tea tree and actually allspice on that later today, just to see if we can really dig down to the underlying infection that's causing it. And oh, ow, just hit it. I was reading ow a lot. Every time I touch something, it hurts. Yesterday I was thinking, oh gosh, it's been so long since I've done any research on Manuka. I'll have to get the books out. So my usual way of doing things is to go and like, have I written about it before? Any notes? And interestingly, I've never written about it for any company. So that's very rare to say. So I was like, oh, great. That means I've got to do huge amounts of work. I know I'll go and get Debbie Atterbury's book out because it'll be in there. But I thought, I know, actually, I'll have a look in Helen Nagle-Smith's book and see if she has done anything on it. And she does a tremendous synopsis in her book. So this isn't out yet, but it is on pre-order in Amazon. It's called Working with Unusual Essential Oils, or Unusual Essential Oils. Fantastic book. And she covers Manuka really, really well. And I was surprised to find there weren't any surprises. Everything that I knew back in the 90s, kind of, I don't think we've discovered very much more since. Although she wrote more about the emotional side, and I would never consider using it emotionally, but I will talk about that in a minute. But the main sort of things that you're looking for is antimicrobial, antiviral. She talks about how she actually uses it neat on the skin, undiluted sometimes. If there's like a skin outbreak or a rash, she'll use it neat on occasions. And I would agree with that. I quite often use that one neat, even though we're always supposed to say you should dilute every single essential oil. And I'm not saying that I would always use it undiluted, because that's definitely not so, but it is one that I kind of just go, oh yeah, just have a bit of that on. Sometimes I use it on the dog as well if she scratches herself, just to clean that up as well. So yeah, it's very much a kind of bugs, nasty bugs and germs kind of essential oil. It has antifungal properties as well, but that's not something I would go for. Something like, I would use tea tree over the top of it, actually. What's interesting is the chemistry really changes a lot based on where it grows. So the chemistry of Manuka grown in Australia is quite different from the one that is grown in New Zealand. And on the east coast of New Zealand, it creates a completely different chemical profile. And again, at the altitude that it grows at. So if you are interested in doing that kind of fussiness that I do get interested in that, and I kind of go, well, what I want it to do is this, and so therefore I want the most amount of this to be able to do it. Specifically when I'm using helichrysum, for example, if you go to sort of Corsica, Sardinia, you'll get more narrow acetate, which is a better skin healer. If you source Manuka that is grown on the east side of New Zealand, and I guess it would have been useful for me to be able to give you some towns and places or whatever, but I don't know those. You have to do that homework. There will be higher levels of triketones, and so ketones are a really interesting chemical group. If anybody's watched any of the lectures by Dr. Maltihosel from Oshadi, he talks about the ketones as being the disincarnators. So what he means by that is that it kind of changes chemical structure and crystalline structure. So on a physical level, when we use ketones, they're very good for breaking down scar tissue, for example. Anything that's really hard, it softens it. So in particular, think about when you have a horrible chesty cough and it's really, really thick with what's it called, catarrh on your chest, or phlegm in your phlegm on your chest, catarrh in your face. It softens it and loosens it off. So anything that's high in ketones is great for those kind of situations. And it's also good. The reason why it calls it disincarnator is because it kind of loosens our spiritual connection with our physical body. So it makes it lighter and able to dissipate. So it's very good for things that are well, like anger, for example, and we feel very in our body, and we want to kind of rise above it. But also, but I always think it's interesting that when you read in the Bible, they say that when Christ was on the cross, they gave him a sponge soaked on vinegar on a stick of hyssop. So, like, if you imagine that he sucked the hyssop, it's like as if he just drifts away from his physical body. No, so does he kind of disassociate, or does he actually just let go and die? So this disincarnatus is a really interesting sort of thing to contemplate, really. And that is what Helen talks about in her book, about how she uses it for anger, and particularly for skin conditions like eczema, where people's conditions get worse because of their emotional and mental well-being. So if somebody starts to spiral or gets very emotional, and suddenly you have this huge flare up of emotion, of physical symptoms, Manuka might be helpful for that. So yeah, really interesting to kind of revisit the art, because I haven't really thought about it. I've just kind of used it in an automaton way of using it for many, many years. Interesting to think about it again, really.
You're saying, a lot of the time you're saying, oh, I use it with tea tree. And when I looked at the chemistry of the Manuka I tend to use and the tea tree, they are kind of different, although they seem to be similar oils. Do you always pair them together, or is there time? Like for me, I'll use tea tree all the time. That's my everyday oil. So I mouth rinse with it, little skin complaints, scratches, mosquito bites, that kind of thing. That's the tea tree. But for me, like where Manuka I absolutely love, and I always have a roller with me, is I love it on the throat whenever I'm getting a sore throat, especially from talking or traveling or all those type of things. Manuka goes straight on, and it is a godsend. I love it for that. So that's why I kind of like this idea of super tea tree, that when there's a more of an emergency, and of course Manuka is a bit rarer and thus a bit more expensive as well and hard to get your hands on. So that's for special occasions or big occasions. Tea tree is more your every day. What do you think?
I agree with that entirely. So yeah, tea tree is the one. I've got this spider that is climbing all over. You may well just see like a spider coming to the lens in a minute. It's just going up and down the window and all over the phone. The tea tree I would be the one that would use more often. Interesting that you say about sore throats, because that my stepdad was a really good aromatherapist, and he always used to recommend Manuka for a sore throat, but he used to use it slightly differently. So let me show you, because I think it's probably closer to the indigenous way of using it, because of course they wouldn't use it or use the essential oil in the past. Potentially they do now, but they wouldn't have done in the past. But what they would have done is either boiled the leaves, or burnt the leaves and then gasped the fumes, and that's what he used to recommend to do. So actually this is copaiba, but it doesn't matter. So like that. And so he used to really recommend just taking it right down. And of course, when you think about it from that point of view of what Helen said about how it affects anger, that you hold anger there, don't you? It's like in your throat, you want to just, it's gonna come out, right down into the lungs. Is a really interesting way of thinking about doing it. And it's lovely, of course, because you can taste the volatiles. And I have to say, I do like the taste of Manuka. They use it as a tea, I think, as traditional medicine. So yeah, interesting point also about the plant, from what you say about how it's easier to get hold of. My understanding is that when there's been a forest fire, it's one of the very first plants to grow back again. And so there's like a very spiritual message to that about, how things recover fast with Manuka, it's very, very knows recovery. And when you're doing kind of magical work, this idea of baptism of fire and throwing things in the fire to destroy them and helping, I'm just going to get rid of that. I just have finished with that. all of that kind of probably lives within the Manuka plant as well, I would say.
Very much so. And I'm having one of those moments that we've had in previous episodes where I'm kind of smiling and we're kind of got the same stories, because in our book, Gifts of Essential Oils, we talk about, especially when white settlers came to New Zealand, obviously their way of growing food was to clear the land. So they would clear the land just by setting it all on fire. And it was the Manuka plant that would grow back quickly and also hold on to the soil. So it actually would stop soil erosion, which is obviously a problem when you start clearing land. So for me, I absolutely love Manuka for whenever we feel like we've been burnt. It's a really great one for, and I would fully agree with Helen. We talk about it in the book. Really, really great for that kind of anger, or that something I often refer to as our warring mentality. When something goes wrong, we're like, right, they're going to pay for that. And kind of the most, the kind of archetype that I have in my head is divorce. Right, I'm going to take them for everything. I'm going to make sure they suffer. That kind of real warring mentality. Manuka is a really beautiful one. And when we think about that, Manuka has such a close relationship to the bees. Bees, of course, when they go and land on the plant, they're not landing on any of the plant. They're landing on the flower. They're going for the nectar. They're going for the sweet spot. And Manuka is a really beautiful one for almost like helping us to see the good in people, and when we feel burnt, just to take a step back in that way. Now, it's a really bad, because of, obviously the Maori people have their own gods and goddesses. I do refer to a couple in my book, but I can't pronounce them, so I'm not even going to try. But I almost find that Manuka almost has a bit of an Athena energy about it, because of course Athena is a goddess of warfare, but warfare was her last option. It was, how can we look for a tactical way, or a way that works for everyone, rather than let's just kind of, take that Aries or that Mars point of view where we're just going to conquer and defeat. So I feel whenever we feel we've been burnt, it's a really good one to stop that rising up of that warring mentality, because we know in the long run that's not going to serve us. But I think it also allows us to look at people that are maybe, trying to take advantage of us, or, that are negative in our lives, and having a bit of maybe mercy on them, and maybe even, rising above that and going, well, they're obviously a lost soul, and I hope that they find their way, and I'm not going to get drawn into that conflict with them either. So I really love Manuka for that.
I find that fascinating. I also find it really hard to believe that you ever have that kind of "they're going to pay" mentality. It just doesn't fit with me that you are ever like that.
Trust me, I do. I think we all do. When someone pisses us off, there is that moment of wanting to retaliate. Right? How can I make them pay? That's not fair. I think we all, somewhere in us, have a warring mentality.
I wear it there. It's my go-to behaviour, that is. I get very, very angry, I do. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I agree with you on both counts about what you said about the goddesses, not correct to overlay like a westernized opinion of it. But I do agree with the idea that Athena's strategic in her ways of thinking things out. That she goes, no, just wait a moment, just step back put that sword down for a moment, please. And of course she has a shield, which is all about reflection. And this is something that I'm really getting involved in a lot at the moment, thinking about reflection, about going off topic completely now. The spirit's just kicked in and gone, no, you can just switch on now. So a lot of the work that I've been doing at the moment is about the nymphs of ancient Greece, and where the nymphs are usually, well, water nymphs, for example, are at water, or they have like mountain nymphs, etc. The Melissa are bee nymphs, but usually water, and the different ways that water can be used spiritually, and particularly with the idea of a pond. Same principle with Athena's shield. Perseus's shield, he uses it to reflect Medusa's stare, didn't he? Sent it right back. And so this idea of being able to look, we talked the other day about scrying. Do you remember? And I said, I can't scry. Well, actually, I've been learning to reflect in that way of looking and seeing what comes back to me. And Manuka has been useful for that. Just being able to look and go and reflect and think, wait a minute, how did this come about? How did this come about? Because usually that whole thing of, for me anyway, I forget what I did in that argument. I just remembered what everybody else did. and also, and it arises from that particular moment, the conflagration, the fire, that's what you remember. But in particularly, I remember Debbie Atterby talking to me about this idea of the Maori clearing the land. And now that they don't do it, they say that this is potentially why there are so many forest fires in Australia and New Zealand now, because that natural protection of the land has gone. Before, they protected the land by burning it off, so in a controlled manner. Mm-hmm. And so this idea of preparation and understanding what went before, the good and the bad of what went before, is a Manuka reflection.
Very much. Now, there's also a parakeet. Hopefully, I get this name right. I believe it's a Kakariki parakeet. That's also associated with the Manuka plant, and they will often like chew on the leaves, and then they'll preen their feathers to get rid of parasites in their feathers as well. So you'll often see them floating around as well. So we look at, again, what an oil does for the physical, it can do for the holistical as well. Really good for any kind of parasitic energy. So before we're talking about, not getting dragged down by conflict, but I also think anything that's kind of dragging you down where someone's, trying to bleed you dry energetically or vampiring you in that way. But also, even I find it really helpful when it comes to negative self-talk or anything that's kind of eating you up. So it's really great for that as well, for cleansing that out of the way as a bit of an energy purifier.
Oh, there were too many strands to pick up there. So first of all, I wish you'd known that about. Well, you should. For those of you who aren't watching on video and who are watching on Spotify, you didn't see my face of how much I grinned when I thought about a parakeet preening itself. But I'd love to know that. I'm sure there's clinical trials into that if we have a look. But I wonder then how good it would be for head lice and nits. I'm guessing it's probably quite good. Certainly tea tree has so much evidence. Why would you look for another one? But it's always fascinating to think about that, isn't it? But going right back to the initial clinical evidence that I talked about with the MRSA, that is kind of what MRSA does. It finds a particular spike protein and it hitches a ride all the way through the rest of the human system. So it infiltrates and works like an internal parasite to the blood cells. So it's interesting that, that's right back to where we came in.
Very much so. Now, when it comes to chakras, what chakra would you associate Manuka with?
Well, see, I thought normally I forget to think about this until you ask me, and then I have a panic about 2 minutes before you ask me and think, I haven't done this. But I did do this, but I still couldn't really come up with one. But what I decided was, in terms of, I don't feel like it actually affects the chakra on me at all, but I feel the vibration goes from here, just under my chin, to just above my chest. So that would say to me that throat and heart, but any more than that, I couldn't really say. What's your thoughts? I'm interested to know.
For me, I tend to, because of that empowerment and that kind of, the solar plexus, when it's out of balance or when we're kind of in a warring kind of point of view, that's almost solar plexus versus solar plexus. We're trying to get a one-upman. So I find it's a really nice one for balancing the solar plexus chakra. Has a real kind of golden energy to it, I find.
That's really fascinating to know. And actually picking up, you won't need to read Helen's book, actually, by the time I finish with this particular segment. But she said, as you know, she sees things as colours. And yes. She said it vibrates on the colour blue. And I was like, that is the colour I just said as well, blue. But also she told an interesting story that the Maori use Manuka and Kanuka together as the masculine and feminine. So Manuka is the female version, and the Kanuka is the male version. Now I never knew that, but I have always used them together. So I
Mm.
don't, but I don't really know why. It might be something that Michael taught me for a long time ago because he was really interested in how things paired. But it might be just that in my head I say them together all the time. I always go Manuka and Kanuka. They don't exist singly almost for me. So that's interesting as well. So if you want to know more about that, as I say, there's so much interesting stuff about that in Helen's book.
Yeah. Now, one thing I should point out, we've referred to Kanuka a few times. Kanuka, we might go, oh, Manuka, Kanuka, they must be, are they related? In fact, Kanuka is more related to Kunzia in Australia than it is Manuka in New Zealand.
Well, that's interesting to know. Yeah, I knew they weren't related. What she points out is that they grow together, though. So I don't know
Ah,
how whether that's a bit like in our country, nettles and dock leaves grow together. But so that's interesting. Whether I don't know whether they're planted together or whether nature kind of whether their
look into that.
seeds are attracted to germinate in similar places. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll have to dive into that for sure. I think we'll have to do a full episode on Kanuka because, yeah, that is, I find, I've found this with my crystal work and I've found this with my essential oil work as well. There's our general oils and crystals that we all know. There's lavender, there's peppermint, there's amethyst, there's rose quartz. And they're kind of the common ones. But there is this kind of, as we step into this new era, into this new age, there are these more rarer crystals and also these rarer oils that I think are kind of coming in maybe sometimes to help out with a physical ailment that may be more prevalent, but I think also to help us with those kind of new age challenges that we get as well. And I know in your mother's book, she often refers to few oils as like it's kind of not peaking yet. It's going to be helpful in the future in that type of thing. And I think Manuka and especially Kanuka really, really powerful in that way.
Yeah, I definitely get the sense that I'm pausing because I don't know whether I want to say oils or plants. I'm going to say oils. Have times of being no, I am going to say plants. Have times of being very full-bodied and hugely full of energy, and then kind of go a little bit dormant.
Mm.
And interestingly, I had a conversation with a lady at the garden centre the other day because I've been many times over the past few days. I'm keeping the government in taxes just through VAT on plants at the moment. And I bought a load of parsley and different herbs. And she said, oh, yeah, I haven't bought rosemary because I got loads of different things. I said, no, I don't need a rosemary. I said, my rosemary is magnificent this year. And she went very quiet. And I thought, oh, she's having a moment of, oh, God, I've got a nutter here. And she went, am I? And she said, and I went, why you say it like that? And she said, everything else has died. All my other herbs, none of my herbs are any good at all. But my rosemary's gone huge. And I went, am I? So it's obviously the rosemary's having a moment. And I remember that
Mm.
in lockdown, apples had a huge moment. The trees were just heaving under them. And I suppose that it's the weather, but it could be more than that, couldn't it? Or maybe like the cicadas have like these cycles, these natural cycles. Maybe there's a cycle we don't know in the plants that they have maybe they're ovulating or whatever. I don't know.
I think there's probably, there's a whole field of study and exploration that we and not too many other people have gone down yet of like how the plants do help to prepare us for, things that are happening. And I have heard that eating local food, we are going off on tangents now, but eating local food, if the plant can actually detect things that will be coming up and happening, and they'll actually put it into their chemistry. And so when we eat food that is local, it actually helps to prepare us for what's coming up.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely true of local honey for hay fever. It
Yes.
because of the actual association with the pollen. But we are so off tangent now. And actually going back to Helen again, but not her book this time. Helen sends me lovely little pictures all of the time on Facebook Messenger, and she was out, presumably she was on her allotment, and she took a smashing picture of a bumblebee, on a rapeseed plant. Now, if you'd have read Facebook about 3 years ago, everybody was saying rapeseed is a terrible plant, so bad for you. Even insects hate it. And I was like, that's so interesting. It must be really insecticidal. Then when I was reading the Melissa book, I read about this particular bumblebee that had adapted, because a certain type of rose that it used to like to feed on was no longer flourishing. It was this kind of leaf cutter bee, no longer flourishing. And so it had adapted to go for rapeseed. And she'd obviously accidentally like captured this moment in nature of like this bee that was this bee that had adapted. But yeah, so they had the plants had changed, the insects had changed to follow that, and it had obviously changing the ecology of the area.
Just another reason we need to live in tune with nature as much as we can, I guess.
Well, going completely off topic now. Sorry, everybody, if you're listening. I'm hoping that these are interesting thoughts. I've got into podcasts in a big way, walking the dog in the morning, because frankly, I hate the job and it goes too slowly otherwise. And I was listening to one this morning about, well, I can't remember the woman's name or anything. But anyway, she was a water coach, and she was talking about how she had cleansed her pineal gland. Now, I have to say, this is not the kind of podcast I would normally listen to, but it was quite interesting. And she was saying that she was a physical trainer, and then she'd become a boxing trainer, and so she was like physically fit, and she had become emotionally and mentally fit, with boxing. But then when lockdown came, she said, I don't really know that much about the world. I'm going to see if I can become spiritually fit. And she became very interested in water. Her name will come back to me in a minute. And she was talking about how she had gone through lockdown, looking at all of the different ways that you can purify water. Anyway, long story short, then when she came out of lockdown, she went to a fair at Glastonbury, and there was this woman doing crystal healing. And she was like, whoa, that's that. And the woman said, what do you mean? And she said, well, have you got a torch or something? And she said, what do you mean? Well, how are you getting all the colours to come out that crystal? And she could see the light colours coming out of the crystal. She could see the aura. She'd never seen it before. And she was saying this process she'd gone through, this like deep cleansing of like filtering waters and making sure that she got rid of the chlorines and the fluorides and whatever. She'd suddenly been able to see so much more in terms of crystals and stuff than she could see before.
Wow.
It's so interesting. Yeah, interesting.
Amazing. Now, I'm going to bring us back to Manuka, and I've got two questions
Oh,
for
how
you.
boring.
Number one, no, Manuka's never boring. Astrologically, could you pin Manuka to a planet?
God, I forgot completely to think astrologically. Actually, yeah, no, I didn't. Astronomically, I'm going to say, because I don't feel like it's like the normal set of planets. To me, it feels like it's the pole star.
Okay, got you. Fair enough. Yep.
And maybe the Pleiades, because just like where you're like, the resonance kind of takes you in the sky when you think about it. But I know that that's a Maori initiation planet, isn't it? That they the young men learn to navigate by the pole star and by the Pleiades.
I didn't know that. Which, yeah.
That's my understanding, yes. And about the Pleiades have been the seven sisters. So I think, yeah, I'm going to say the pole star.
Okay. Well, I'm going to stick with my Athena theme and stick with the asteroid Pallas Athena. I find it resonates with that kind of energy of helping us to, live our lives without that warring mentality and a bit more integrity. And Pallas Athena really helps us to shine brightly in that way.
That's lovely.
Yeah. Now, it seems to be a question that we've been bringing up, and I've kind of noticed this theme over the last 20 episodes or so, we've talked about whether everyone needs to have this oil or not. So, and whether it's a everyday oil or a very special occasion oil. We've talked about oils like spikenard and Palo Santo, which are only needed for very special occasions. So, in that regard, where would you consider Manuka? Would you say it's worth having in your collection, but you're not going to use it every day? You're just going to use it for more special health concerns, plus possibly that warring mentality? What would you say?
Yeah, so I went to watch the Aroma Trust Summit this week, and it's still on sale if people want to go and watch it. It was fantastic. And somebody that I really like was speaking, who is Anna Papa, I can say her name perfectly well, Anna Papajoglou, who's a Greek lady. And she was talking about sourcing closer to home. Now, she lives in Greece, so that's the place of the herbs, if ever there was some, wasn't there? Mm. And I do really buy into this idea that is there another medicine that can do the same job closer to home? And my feeling about that is probably there isn't one that does the same job as Manuka, except for tea tree. Well, that's got to travel a long way anyway. And it is well enough available in this country. I don't need to import it from overseas. I can get it without, a large number come on one plane rather than mine coming individually on one plane. Mm-hmm. So I feel very comfortable doing that. And given the fact that it's so easily sustainable, it just grows back immediately after whatever you do it. I'm more than happy to go Manuka. And is there another oil that could replace it? Probably tea tree, but I think that I quite like the idea that there's safety in numbers. You don't just want to turn up to a fight with one person, you want an army. So that Manuka Canuka tea tree allspice is my go-to these days. So yeah, I think it's a good one to get. I think it's not one that you absolutely need, like you absolutely need lavender or you absolutely need geranium, but it is like the second tier, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think it is. I would agree with you there. For me, where oils separate, chemistry will overlap, and so physically you can always replace oil. But when you come out to this holistic point of view, that warring mentality, that vengefulness or revenge, Manuka is my number one oil for that type of thing. The things for anger, I'd probably go for eucalyptus or cardamom for anger. But if it's revenge and that type of thing, then that's where I really like Manuka. So from an emotional toolkit, I'd have it for that reason.
That's really interesting. I'm going to try it for that now.
Do. Now, I must admit, Liz, I'm a little bit disappointed with you. You haven't paid me one compliment. Not only is it my birth week, and I'm about to get closer to 50 than I am to 40, but I've given birth in the last couple of weeks. Given birth to twins, and you haven't commented on how good I look.
You've definitely got your figure back. Look at those. Chakra balancing and earth's treasures. How beautiful.
Yes.
Oil. Well, you have been
busy. 2 books that I've been working on in two different groups of people, and they weren't meant to come out in the same couple of weeks, but they did. So I've got earth treasures. So obviously my other love is essential oils and crystals. So this is a bit of a guidebook on many different essential oils, and then the crystals that I find what they pair with nicely. So I'll give you 3 different crystals and little activities that you can do to really start working with it as well. So that one's out now, and I'll put links down below if anyone's interested. And then of course I love the chakras. I find the chakras really, really interesting. So I've just picked my favorite top 200 essential oils. And what I've done is I've talked about how they help with the main 7 chakras and the extra chakras as well. Now, there's lots of information about oils and chakras out there. So where my point of difference is when we think about the chakras, my heart chakra is going to be different to Liz's heart chakra, which is going to be different to your heart chakra. So do we all just use the same blend or the same oils? So what I've done in each chapter, there's a little quiz. And the quiz just has a set of statements. And you pick, statements 1, 6, and 8, and then you flick over the page, and 1, 6, and 8 will resonate with, will assimilate or be matched with 3 different oils, and that's your heart chakra blend. And then I talk about how you could use your own personal heart chakra blend. So it's kind of individualizing your oils and your chakra use as well. So that's a fun one that's been out for a couple of weeks now, and people are really enjoying that as well. So yeah, there's my shameless self-promotion today.
That is fantastic. It does make me laugh. Your top 200 oils.
Do you know what? It was actually just where I found a cutting point. Like, okay, I've got to stop now. And then I counted. And I think I did 199. So I'm like, oh, I'll throw one more in, type of thing. But yes,
And then you have to go, I don't know which are the one I like. I don't like any others. I only like 199 of them.
oh no, there was a lot more. Vanessa will tell you, when we wrote our book, Gifts of Essential Oils, we did a little bit different. You know, as a writer, I'm used to sit in front of the laptop and off you go, kind of thing. But Vanessa is technologically not advanced whatsoever. So what we decided is we actually sat together on a summer solstice several years ago now, and we actually sat with all the oils and a voice recorder, and we recorded it, and we just spoke about each oil. And then we basically had that turned into a transcript. And then my job was to kind of because obviously we speak different to the way we write, I then had to take that information in that way as well. So it got to the final night when we were kind of like getting to the end. I'm like, oh, how about we do this oil and this oil and this oil? And there's like a queue of oils. It's like a waiting room in my head. Like, put me in. And, you know, there are even some oils that I haven't seen available for several years. I'm like, oh, okay, maybe you can't go in. But then I'm just going to get emails on how do I get that oil. But yes, just my top 300.
Very good. Well, many congratulations. 2 books is a massive achievement.
Thank you very much. And now I'm excited because Helen's got one as well. It must be the time for birthing books.
It is, definitely. And yeah. And it's such a great time of year, this is. Everybody goes on holiday and you can just sit and go, oh, I know what I want to read on the beach. And grab them all. Yeah, my favourite time of year for books to come out, this is.
Very much so. So thank you very much for joining us with Fellowship in Essential Oils. We hope that we've enlightened you about Manuka and some other unusual things as we went off on some tangents today. But we'll be back next week to dive into another amazing gift of Mother Nature. Until then, take care and see you then. Goodbye.
See you soon. Bye-bye.